What I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about missing persons cases. A single photograph, found 17 years too late, that reveals the terrifying truth about what really happened to the Thompson family at the Grand Canyon. I've been investigating cold cases for over 2 decades, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered buried in the evidence files of the Thompson disappearance. This isn't just another missing family story. This is something far more sinister. Before we dive into this disturbing case, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything. And trust me, you'll want to share your theories in the comments. I've spent the better part of my career chasing shadows, following trails that have long gone cold, diving deep into cases that others have given up on. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered when I reopened the Thompson family file. It was supposed to be routine, just another cold case review for the documentary I was working on about missing families in national parks. What I found instead was a nightmare that had been hiding in plain sight for 17 years. The Thompson family consisted of 4 members: David Thompson, a 42-year-old architect from Denver, his wife Sarah, 39, a high school English teacher, and their 2 children, Emma, 16, and Michael, 13. They were, by every account I could find, an ordinary American family. David worked long hours, but always made time for weekend camping trips. Sarah volunteered at the local animal shelter and coached Emma's debate team. Emma was an honor student with dreams of studying journalism at Northwestern. Michael was obsessed with geology and could identify rock formations from 100 yards away. In March of 1996, they planned what was supposed to be their spring break adventure, a week-long camping trip to the Grand Canyon. David had been promising the kids this trip for 2 years, ever since Michael had become fascinated with the geological history of the Colorado Plateau. Sarah had initially been hesitant about camping in such a remote area, but David assured her they'd stay on well-marked trails and camp in designated areas. They'd done dozens of camping trips before, mostly in Colorado's Rocky Mountains, and David was an experienced outdoorsman with wilderness survival training from his time in the Army. The family left Denver on March 15, 1996, driving David's red Ford Explorer packed with camping gear, enough food for 8 days, and all the standard safety equipment: first aid kit, emergency beacon, water purification tablets, and a GPS device that was considered state-of-the-art for its time. Sarah had insisted on the extra safety measures after reading about other families who had gotten lost in the desert. She was always the cautious one, the planner, the one who prepared for every possible scenario. Their plan was straightforward: drive to the South Rim, set up camp at Mather Campground for the first night, then venture into the backcountry for a 3-day hiking and camping expedition along the Tonto Trail. David had obtained all the necessary permits months in advance. They planned to return to Mather Campground on March 19th, spend 1 more night, and drive back to Denver on March 20th. Emma had been documenting everything with her new 35mm camera, a birthday gift from her parents that she carried everywhere. The last confirmed sighting of the Thompson family was on March 16th at approximately 2:30 p.m. when Park Ranger Julie Martinez checked their permits at the South Kaibab trailhead. Martinez would later tell investigators that the family seemed well prepared and in good spirits. David was confident about their route. Sarah was taking pictures of the kids against the canyon backdrop, and Michael was excitedly pointing out different rock layers to anyone who would listen. Emma was already several shots into her first roll of film. Martinez noted in her report that the weather forecast was favorable: clear skies, temperatures in the 60s during the day, dropping to the 40s at night. Perfect hiking weather. She estimated they had enough water for their planned 3-day expedition, plus extra. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe. She watched them disappear down the trail. David leading the way with his worn hiking boots and military surplus backpack, Sarah bringing up the rear to keep an eye on the kids. That was the last time anyone would see the Thompson family alive. When they failed to return to Mather Campground on March 19th as planned, park rangers initiated a search. The campground host, an elderly man named Frank Rodriguez, who had been working at the Grand Canyon for 15 years, became concerned when their reserved campsite remained empty for 2 consecutive nights. He'd seen thousands of families come and go, and experienced campers like the Thompsons were never this late without calling ahead. The initial search focused on their planned route along the Tonto Trail. Rangers found their intended campsite from the first night, fire rings still warm, some scattered food items, but no sign of the family or their gear. It appeared they had broken camp normally and continued on their planned route. Search dogs picked up their scent leading away from the campsite toward Hermit Creek, which aligned with their submitted itinerary. But then the trail went cold, literally. The search teams found no trace of the family beyond that first campsite. No footprints, no dropped items, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. It was as if they had simply vanished into the canyon itself. The search expanded to include helicopter surveys, additional ground teams, and even volunteer groups from Denver who had driven down to help look for their neighbors. As the days turned into weeks, theories began to emerge. The most prevalent was that the family had gotten lost and fallen victim to the canyon's unforgiving environment. Desert exposure can kill quickly, and even experienced hikers have been known to become disoriented in the vast expanse of the Grand Canyon. Search teams focused on side canyons, hidden overhangs, and areas where a family might seek shelter if they were lost or injured. Another theory suggested they might have fallen into one of the canyon's deeper ravines. The Grand Canyon is riddled with hidden crevices and unstable rock formations. A single misstep could send someone tumbling hundreds of feet into darkness where their body might never be recovered. If the entire family had been traveling close together along a narrow ledge, a rockfall or ground collapse could have taken them all at once. The investigation revealed some troubling details about David's mental state in the weeks before the trip. Co-workers mentioned he had been stressed about a major project that was behind schedule. His firm was competing for a lucrative contract, and David had been working 70-hour weeks trying to complete the designs. Sarah had confided to her sister that David seemed distant and preoccupied, not his usual enthusiastic self about their camping plans. This led to a darker theory, that David had planned the family's disappearance as an elaborate murder-suicide. Investigators looked into the family's finances and found that while they weren't wealthy, they were stable. David's life insurance policy was substantial, but not unusually so for a man his age with 2 children. There was no evidence of marital problems, no history of domestic violence, no indication that David was capable of harming his family. Sarah's sister, Linda, vehemently rejected this theory. She insisted that David adored Sarah and the children, that he was looking forward to retirement and watching Emma graduate from college. She pointed out that David had been planning future camping trips and had recently purchased new hiking boots for Michael, whose feet were growing rapidly. These weren't the actions of a man planning to kill his family. The search officially continued for 6 weeks, making it one of the most extensive missing persons searches in Grand Canyon history. Over 200 volunteers participated, covering more than 500 square miles of canyon country. Helicopters flew hundreds of hours, search dogs worked for weeks, and experienced trackers examined every possible route the family might have taken. But the canyon kept its secrets. No bodies were found. No additional clues were discovered. The red Ford Explorer remained in the parking lot at the south rim, slowly accumulating dust and parking tickets, a silent testament to a family that had simply vanished. Park officials eventually had it towed to a storage facility where it would sit for years, another piece of evidence in a case that defied explanation. The media attention was intense for the first few months. The Thompson case became a national story. featured on programs like Unsolved Mysteries and in newspaper articles across the country. The mystery of an entire family disappearing without a trace captured the public imagination. Psychics called in tips, amateur detectives proposed theories, and conspiracy theorists suggested everything from alien abduction to government cover-ups. Emma's camera became a particular point of interest for investigators. She had been an avid photographer, and the camera she carried was a high-quality Canon that her parents had given her for her 16th birthday just 2 months before the trip. Sarah had mentioned to friends that Emma was excited about documenting their Grand Canyon adventure and had purchased several rolls of film specifically for the trip. The fact that this camera was never found puzzled investigators. Even if the family had fallen into a deep ravine, personal items typically scattered during such accidents. Cameras, being relatively heavy and durable, often survived falls that killed their owners. The absence of the camera suggested either that it was buried too deeply to be found, or that it was somewhere investigators hadn't thought to look. As 1996 turned into 1997, the active search was scaled back. The case remained open, and park rangers continued to keep an eye out for any signs of the family, but the intensive daily searches came to an end. The Thompson family joined the growing list of people who had entered America's national parks and simply vanished without explanation. Linda Thompson Michaels, Sarah's sister, refused to give up. She organized annual searches on the anniversary of the disappearance, bringing volunteers back to the canyon to look for any trace of her sister's family. She maintained a website dedicated to the case, posted flyers in hiking supply stores across the Southwest, and personally contacted every tour guide and frequent canyon visitor she could find. By 2000, even these volunteer efforts began to dwindle. People moved on with their lives, other tragedies captured public attention, and the Thompson case faded from memory for everyone except those who loved them. The red Ford Explorer was eventually sold at auction. The family's Denver home was sold to pay outstanding debts, and their possessions were distributed among relatives. The case file grew dusty in the Grand Canyon National Park offices. Occasionally, a new ranger would review the file. Sometimes a journalist would call asking about the family that disappeared, but mostly the Thompsons became just another unsolved mystery in a place that had claimed countless victims over the decades. Then, in the spring of 2013, everything changed. An amateur photographer named Rick Valdez was exploring lesser-known areas of the canyon, looking for unique shots for a coffee table book he was hoping to publish. Valdez was an experienced hiker who had been visiting the Grand Canyon for over 20 years. He prided himself on finding photographic opportunities that other visitors missed, often venturing into areas that required technical climbing skills to access. On April 3, 2013, Valdez was working his way down a narrow side canyon about 3 miles east of the main Tonto Trail when he spotted something unusual wedged into a crevice about 30 feet above him. It appeared to be man-made, reflecting sunlight in a way that natural rock formations didn't. Valdez was an experienced rock climber, and the technical challenge of reaching the object intrigued him almost as much as his curiosity about what it might be. It took him nearly 2 hours to safely climb up to the crevice, using specialized equipment he carried for exactly these kinds of situations. What he found there would reopen one of the Grand Canyon's most baffling missing persons cases and raise questions that had never been considered before. Wedged deep into a crack in the rock, protected from 17 years of weather by its position in the narrow crevice, was a 35mm camera. Not just any camera. A Canon AE-1 with a distinctive scratch on the camera body that matched exactly the description of Emma Thompson's camera that had been circulated to park rangers and volunteers for years after the family's disappearance. Valdez immediately recognized the significance of his discovery. He carefully extracted the camera, photographed its position in the crevice, and marked the GPS coordinates before carefully wrapping it and hiking back to his vehicle. By that evening, he was on the phone with Grand Canyon National Park authorities, and by the next morning, the camera was on its way to the FBI's Evidence Analysis Laboratory in Quantico. The camera was in remarkably good condition considering it had been exposed to the elements for 17 years. The protective case had cracked, allowing some moisture inside, but the camera body itself was intact. More importantly, there was still film inside, 3 rolls, in fact. 2 rolls appeared to have been fully exposed, while the third had only a few shots taken. The FBI's photo analysis team worked carefully to develop the film using techniques designed to recover images from damaged or degraded material. What they found in those photographs would fundamentally change the understanding of what had happened to the Thompson family during their final days at the Grand Canyon. The first roll of film contained exactly what investigators expected: family vacation photos, pictures of the kids at various lookout points along the south rim, Sarah smiling against the canyon backdrop, David pointing out geological formations to Michael. These photos were clearly taken on March 15th and 16th, matching the timeline of when the family was last seen. The second roll contained more of the same, but with an important difference. These photos were taken along the hiking trail, showing the family's progression into the backcountry. There were shots of their first night's campsite, pictures of Michael collecting rock samples, images of Sarah reading in her camp chair. The timestamps on the photos, determined by analyzing the light conditions and shadows, suggested these were taken on March 17th and 18th. But it was the third roll of film that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The few images on this roll were unlike anything investigators had expected to find. They showed what appeared to be the family in severe distress, but not from the environmental factors that had been the focus of the original search. The photographs were disturbing. They showed Emma and Michael looking terrified, their faces dirty and tear-streaked. Sarah appeared to be injured, with what looked like blood on her clothing. David was not visible in these final photographs, though his shadow could be seen in one image, suggesting he was the one taking the pictures. Most disturbing of all was the final photograph on the roll. It was a close-up of what appeared to be a handwritten note, though the image was partially obscured and difficult to read. Photo enhancement specialists worked for weeks to improve the clarity of this image, and what they eventually deciphered would raise more questions than it answered. The note, written in what appeared to be David's handwriting, contained only a few legible words. "Not what we thought. They were watching. Emma has the can't let them." The rest of the message was either too blurred to read or cut off by the edge of the photograph. These final photographs completely changed the nature of the investigation. What had been presumed to be a hiking accident or environmental disaster now appeared to be something far more sinister. The images suggested the family had encountered some kind of threat during their camping trip, something that had frightened them enough that David felt compelled to document it with his daughter's camera. But who or what had the family encountered? The photographs provided no clear answers. There were no other people visible in any of the images, no indication of what had caused Sarah's apparent injuries or the children's obvious distress. The canyon in the background of the final photos was unfamiliar to park rangers, who couldn't immediately identify the location where they had been taken. The discovery of the camera also raised new questions about the location where the family had died. The crevice where Valdez found the camera was nearly 3 miles from the family's intended route along the Tonto Trail. How had the camera ended up in such a remote location? Had the family deviated from their planned route, or had someone else placed the camera there? Analysis of the crevice itself revealed some additional clues. The crack in the rock was narrow and deep, the kind of place where something could be deliberately hidden rather than accidentally dropped. The camera's position suggested it had been carefully wedged into the crevice rather than falling there naturally. Someone had intentionally placed it in that specific location. This raised the possibility that whoever had encountered the Thompson family had taken the camera and hidden it, perhaps not wanting the photographs to be found. But why wait 17 years? And why hide it in such a remote location rather than simply destroying it? The investigation was officially reopened, this time with a very different focus. Instead of searching for signs of an environmental disaster or hiking accident, investigators began looking for evidence of foul play. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to examine the photographs and develop a profile of whoever might have encountered the family. Their analysis suggested that the Thompson family had been held captive for at least 2 days after their planned return date. The progression of fear and distress visible in the photographs indicated a prolonged ordeal rather than a sudden accident. The fact that David appeared to be taking the final photographs suggested he might have been forced to document what was happening to his family. The search for the Thompson family's remains resumed with new urgency and an expanded search area. Teams focused on the region around where the camera had been found, working outward in gradually expanding circles. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to search for buried remains, and cadaver dogs were used to sweep areas that might contain the family's bodies. But once again, the canyon refused to give up its secrets. Despite months of intensive searching, no trace of the Thompson family was found. No clothing, no camping equipment, no human remains. It was as if the family had vanished as completely as their camera had been hidden. The case took on new urgency when investigators realized they might be dealing with a serial killer who had been operating in national parks for decades. The FBI began reviewing other missing persons cases from national parks across the Southwest, looking for similar patterns or circumstances. What they found was disturbing. Over the past 30 years, more than 24 families or small groups had disappeared in national parks under circumstances that defied easy explanation. Most had been attributed to hiking accidents or environmental factors, but when reviewed in light of the Thompson case, several showed troubling similarities. The Hendricks family had vanished in Yellowstone in 1989. The Kowalski family had disappeared in Arches National Park in 1993. The Morales family had vanished in Big Bend in 1999. In each case, experienced hikers had simply disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only their vehicles and unanswered questions. None of these cases had received the intensive media attention that the Thompson disappearance had generated, partly because they had occurred in more remote areas with fewer visitors. But the pattern was unmistakable. Families were disappearing from national parks at a rate that seemed too high to be purely coincidental. The FBI began developing a theory that a person or group of people had been targeting families visiting national parks, possibly for years or even decades. The remote locations provided perfect hunting grounds, vast wilderness areas where screams wouldn't be heard and bodies might never be found. But who was capable of such crimes? The logistics alone seemed overwhelming. National parks covered thousands of square miles of rugged terrain. How could someone monitor visitor patterns, select targets, and carry out attacks without being detected by park rangers or other visitors? The investigation team began focusing on people with extensive knowledge of the national park system. Current and former park employees, wilderness guides, frequent visitors, anyone who would have the knowledge and opportunity to commit such crimes. They also looked at local residents in areas near national parks, particularly those with criminal histories or suspicious behavior. One name that kept appearing in their research was Marcus Webb, a former park ranger who had worked at various national parks throughout the Southwest during the 1980s and 1990s. Webb had been fired from the Park Service in 1994 for inappropriate conduct with female visitors, and he had subsequently worked as a wilderness guide and hunting outfitter in areas near several national parks. Webb's employment record showed he had worked at Grand Canyon National Park from 1992 to 1994, overlapping with the time frame of the Thompson family's disappearance. He had also worked at Yellowstone during 1988-1989, when the Hendricks family had vanished, and at Arches National Park in 1992-1993, around the time of the Kowalski disappearance. When investigators attempted to locate Webb for questioning, they discovered he had died in a hunting accident in Montana in 2001, 7 years after being fired from the Park Service. The accident had occurred when Webb was alone on a hunting trip, and his body wasn't found for several weeks. The official cause of death was listed as accidental shooting, though some details of the case had raised questions at the time. Webb's death meant that investigators would never be able to question him directly about the Thompson case or the other disappearances, but they were able to search through his personal effects, which had been stored by a distant relative in Montana. What they found in Webb's belongings was deeply disturbing. Hidden in a storage unit that Webb had rented under a false name, investigators discovered hundreds of photographs of families visiting national parks. The photos appeared to have been taken surreptitiously, often from concealed positions, showing families hiking, camping, and exploring various parks. Among these photographs were several images of the Thompson family, taken on March 15th and 16th, 1996, before they had disappeared. The photos showed the family at various locations around the South Rim, captured from distances that suggested Webb had been following and observing them without their knowledge. But perhaps most chilling were the detailed notes Webb had kept about dozens of families he had observed over the years. The notes included information about family compositions, camping plans, equipment, and hiking experience levels. They read like a predator's hunting journal, documenting potential victims and their vulnerabilities. The notes about the Thompson family were particularly detailed. Webb had noted that they were experienced campers but unfamiliar with desert hiking. He had observed their planned route and noted that they would be traveling with expensive camera equipment. Most disturbing of all, he had written assessments of each family member, describing Emma as photo girl, always documenting, and noting that Michael was curious about rocks, easily distracted. These discoveries seemed to solve the mystery of who had encountered the Thompson family during their final days. Webb had clearly been stalking them, waiting for an opportunity to attack when they were isolated in the backcountry. But many questions remained unanswered. If Webb had killed the Thompson family, where were their bodies? Why had he kept Emma's camera for years before hiding it in the canyon? And what had happened during those final days that had prompted David to take such disturbing photographs? The investigation team developed a theory based on the available evidence. They believed that Webb had followed the Thompson family into the backcountry, possibly waiting until their second or third day when they would be at their most isolated location. He had then somehow captured or cornered the family, holding them captive for an unknown period. The photographs suggested that Webb had forced David to document what was happening, possibly as part of some twisted psychological game. The fact that David was taking the photos might indicate that Webb was threatening the family members individually, using their love for each other as a weapon against them. Eventually, Webb had killed the family and disposed of their bodies in a location where they would never be found. The Grand Canyon offered countless possibilities: deep crevices, hidden caves, remote areas where bodies could be concealed or destroyed by scavengers and weather. But why had Webb kept the camera? The investigation team theorized that he had taken it as a trophy, perhaps planning to develop the film himself to relive the crimes. For some reason, he had never developed the film, instead keeping the camera for years before finally hiding it in the canyon. Webb's death in 2001 might have been the moment when he decided to dispose of the camera, facing his own mortality, or perhaps feeling the pressure of ongoing investigations. He might have returned to the Grand Canyon one final time to hide the evidence of his crimes. The timing was significant. Webb had died in late 2001, which meant he could have hidden the camera during his final months, knowing that he was dying or planning his own death. The hunting accident that killed him had occurred in a remote area where his body wasn't found for weeks, raising the possibility that his death might not have been entirely accidental. With Webb dead and the Thompson family's bodies never recovered, the case officially remained unsolved. But investigators felt confident that they had identified the person responsible for the family's disappearance. The evidence linking Webb to the Thompson case and potentially to other missing families was circumstantial but compelling. The discovery of Emma's camera and the photographs it contained provided some closure for the family's relatives, even though many questions remained unanswered. Linda Thompson Michaels finally had confirmation that her sister's family had not simply gotten lost or died in an accident. They had been victims of a deliberate crime, stalked and murdered by a predator who had used his knowledge of the national park system to hunt families for years. The FBI's investigation into other missing families continued, with Webb now a suspect in multiple disappearances across the Southwest. Several other cases were reclassified from missing persons to suspected homicides, though none would ever be definitively solved. The Thompson case became a catalyst for changes in national park safety protocols. Park rangers began paying closer attention to lone individuals who seemed to be observing or following families. Background checks for park employees were strengthened, and new systems were put in place to track the movements of people with access to park facilities and information. But for all the investigative work and policy changes, one fundamental question remained unanswered. Where are the Thompson family's remains? Despite years of searching and advanced forensic techniques, their bodies have never been found. The Grand Canyon continues to keep that secret, somewhere in its vast expanse of stone and shadow. The final photographs from Emma's camera were never released to the public, considered too disturbing and potentially harmful to the family's memory. But investigators who saw them described images that would haunt them for the rest of their careers, a family's final moments, captured by a father who somehow found the strength to document their ordeal, even as his world collapsed around him. Emma Thompson would have been 33 years old when her camera was finally found. She would have finished college, perhaps become the journalist she had dreamed of being, maybe started a family of her own. Michael would have been 30, possibly working as a geologist, exploring the rock formations he had loved so much as a child. David and Sarah would have been approaching retirement, maybe taking their grandchildren on camping trips to safer, more civilized locations. Instead, they remain forever frozen in those final photographs, a family destroyed by a predator who used America's most beautiful wilderness areas as his hunting ground. Their story serves as a reminder that even in places of natural wonder and supposed safety, evil can lurk in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Thompson case file remains open, technically unsolved, despite the strong evidence pointing to Marcus Webb as their killer. Every few years, someone new reviews the case, hoping to find some detail that previous investigators missed, some clue that might finally lead to the recovery of the family's remains. Occasionally, hikers report finding items in remote areas of the Grand Canyon, a piece of fabric caught on a tree branch, rusted camping equipment half buried in sand, bones that usually turn out to belong to animals rather than humans. Each discovery raises hopes that the Thompson family might finally be found, but so far, the canyon has kept its darkest secret. Rick Valdez, the photographer who found Emma's camera, never finished his coffee table book. The experience of discovering evidence of such a horrible crime changed his relationship with the Grand Canyon forever. He continued to visit, but the sense of wonder and peace he had once found there was forever tainted by the knowledge of what had happened to the Thompson family. The camera itself is now stored in an FBI evidence facility, along with the developed photographs and Marcus Webb's surveillance photos and notes. It sits in a climate-controlled room, waiting for some future development that might provide additional clues about what happened during those final days in March 1996. Sometimes I wonder about Emma's photography project, the documented adventure that was supposed to be a celebration of family and natural beauty. Instead, it became evidence of humanity's capacity for evil, a record of innocence destroyed by a predator who saw a loving family as nothing more than prey. The Grand Canyon continues to attract millions of visitors each year, families seeking the same kind of adventure and natural wonder that drew the Thompsons in 1996. Most will have safe, memorable experiences that they'll treasure for the rest of their lives. But somewhere in that vast landscape of stone and sky, the Thompson family's story serves as a reminder that even paradise can hide monsters. As I close this case file and prepare to move on to the next unsolved mystery, I'm struck by the randomness of it all. The Thompson family did everything right. They were experienced campers. They followed safety protocols. They filed proper permits and stuck to marked trails. But none of that mattered when they encountered someone who saw their careful planning and loving family dynamic as opportunities rather than strengths. The photograph that Rick Valdez found 17 years later tells a story of a family's final hours, but it raises more questions than it answers. What exactly did David mean when he wrote that they were watching? Who was watching them? And for how long? What was Emma supposed to have that was mentioned in the partial note? These questions may never be answered. Marcus Webb took those secrets with him to his grave in Montana, and the Grand Canyon has proven remarkably effective at hiding the physical evidence of his crimes. But the camera and its contents serve as a testament to the Thompson family's final days, a reminder that love and courage can persist even in the face of unimaginable horror. David Thompson's decision to document what was happening to his family, even in their final moments, was an act of desperate hope. He must have believed that someone would eventually find the camera, that the photographs would tell the story that he and his family would never be able to tell themselves. In that sense, his final act succeeded. The camera was found, the story was told, and justice of a sort was served. The Thompson family disappeared into the Grand Canyon on a bright March day in 1996, victims of a predator who used one of America's most treasured national parks as his hunting ground. They remain missing, but they are not forgotten. Their story continues to influence park safety policies, criminal investigations, and the ongoing effort to protect families who seek adventure in America's wilderness areas. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the Grand Canyon, 4 people who loved each other and died together are waiting to be found. Until that day comes, Emma's camera stands as their monument, a final gift from a daughter to the world, developed 17 years too late, but carrying a message that finally brought their killer to justice, even beyond the grave. What do you think really happened to the Thompson family during those final days? Was Marcus Webb working alone, or could there have been others involved? Leave your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into America's most baffling cold cases.